Welcome. This is the Cancer Interviews podcast. I'm your host, Bruce Morton. On this episode, we have the story of a woman whose journey with breast cancer did not end with survivorship. She founded the I Rise Above Foundation, a support group for those on their own breast cancer journeys. She is Gillian Lichota of Washington, D.C. And Gillian, welcome to Cancer Interviews.
Thank you for having me, Bruce.
Gillian, we always start from the same place. We want to know a little bit about our guest, exclusive of their journey with cancer. So if you would, tell us a bit about where you're from, what you do for work, which I think we'll be finding out later in this interview, but also when time allows for fun, what you like to do for fun.
Okay, so I'm originally from Canada, Ontario, Canada, and I moved to Washington, D.C. The early 2000s, so 2002, to work at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum.
And when there's time for leisure activities, what do you like to do?
Well, my favorite place is to be in the great outdoors. I love hiking and climbing and doing all sorts of fun things like scaling mountains and in addition to that, my favorite thing is to be next to the water, on the water, in the water, under the water.
Now, in terms of your cancer journey, everybody has a starting point, a point in which life was going on along just fine in a conventional sort of way, and then something wrong was noticed for you. When did you notice that something was wrong or abnormal?
Yeah. My husband and I, we were trying to conceive a child for a good 3 years, which inevitably led us to doing IVF in order to conceive. And so, in the process of doing that, I noticed pretty much overnight a lump form on my right breast. And so, when I was in the shower, I noticed during a self exam that there was definitely a lump and a bit of a dimple forming and quite a burning sensation. So that led me to kind of investigate pretty quickly to find out, what it was, why it was happening, because I had no family history of breast cancer. It wasn't even on my radar.
So you're investigating. Did that consist of going on the internet to learn more, or did you decide to right away go and see a doctor?
Well, no, actually, it didn't even cross my mind that it would be anything of concern. In fact, um, I was told at the time when I was going through those treatments for IVF that breast tissue can become dense, it can become painful. So to expect that, but I was pretty concerned after the treatments were over and it continued on. And so I made an appointment with my OBGYN. And at the time of when they were going to test for my, whether or not the transfer of the embryos worked, to have a look. And sure enough, I learned on the same day that through an ultrasound, that I had all the characteristics of breast cancer.
So at this point, did you see any other healthcare professionals, or did you immediately start out with some sort of treatment regimen?
Well, first I was sent for a biopsy, which confirmed that I had stage 3 breast cancer. And because my breast cancer was estrogen and progesterone driven, and I was in fact pregnant, there was a great concern for my life at that time. So very quickly, we had to come up with a plan and assemble a team of doctors and move forward with some sort of action at that point.
Jillian, it's never a question of whether this news is difficult news. Of course, it's difficult news. It's terrible, life-altering news when you find out that you've been told you have cancer. But in your case, given your persona, your makeup, and the diagnosis involved, these are all variables in an equation, and that resulted in what kind of reaction from you?
Well, I was in a state of shock, obviously. But I knew, being a scientist by profession, I understood what what the consequences were to do nothing, and what I faced in terms of progression at that point if I didn't do anything. And so I had a wonderful team of doctors assembled around me who made great recommendations. They empowered me with information so that I could, move forward with, what was the best decision for me. And ultimately that was to move forward with a mastectomy while I was pregnant. And soon after that followed was I started chemotherapy after 20 weeks of pregnancy.
And to what extent was the mastectomy more difficult because you were pregnant at that time?
Um, well, it posed a significant risk for me. I had a history of miscarriages. And so my team of doctors had to get very creative with how to move forward, with in terms of the simple things that you would not think much about, such as anesthetization. How are we going to do that so that we don't pose such a risk to the fetus? Um, but also from an emotional standpoint, I had went through 3 years, which I thought was the absolute most difficult time of, going through the infertility process and losing late term pregnancies. And I thought that was the hardest part of the road. I never in a million years imagined that here I would be finally pregnant and having to go through, cancer treatment. It just was never on my radar.
By the way, if you like what you hear in this segment, we invite you to subscribe to our podcast by clicking the links below. Once there, you'll see a bell icon. If you click on that, we will notify you when we post a new interview. Now, Gillian, it's so important to have the best possible care team you can have. Based on what we've heard so far, it sounds like you felt that you were in good hands going forward.
I really did. I'm very fortunate because my husband is connected with a number of physicians at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland. And right away, this was a pretty unique situation. And I was able to, have this wonderful team of doctors around me that I felt very empowered by them, providing me information, doing what was best for me. I mean, I had basically three choices. I could go forward and with the pregnancy and wait until um, after my baby was born to then address the cancer. But because of the type of cancer I have, which is fueled by um, estrogen, and I'm pregnant, and my estrogen in my body is going to increase over time. It it didn't look good for me. And in fact, it put a huge risk of death for me and progression of the cancer spreading. I could have aborted the pregnancy, and that didn't feel good to me either. I really wanted to be a mother. It was really in my heart. Or I could go forward with the path that I took, and that was to start to have the mastectomy and then have start chemotherapy after 20 weeks once the chemicals can't pass the placenta. So that for me felt like the best option at the time, and I've never regretted it since.
Gillian, you mentioned your husband, and it sounds like he brought a certain level of expertise to the overall situation. Let me ask you about your husband's involvement in another way that has nothing to do with medicine. What was your husband like as a source of support?
Oh, he's my best friend. And that is really important when you're going through cancer of any kind or any kind of illness, that you have a supportive partner who will give you your space to go through the gamut of emotions and just give you permission or support you just to be who you are, because it's really difficult. Um, to laugh with you when you need to laugh, and to cry with you when you need to cry. And so, he absolutely provided that to me and still does.
Anybody else beside your husband that you could also list as significant sources of support?
Mm. Well, my nurse navigator at Johns Hopkins was incredible. She had been through breast cancer 10 years prior, the same type of breast cancer, not during her pregnancy, but um, that was really important to me. But in general, I felt pretty isolated as a young woman. I tried reaching out to support groups and I felt very lost. There was a very large age gap, and I felt there was certain challenges I was facing and needs that I needed to be filled that no one around me really could relate to. I couldn't relate to the sort of the rah pink, survivorship um, mentality. I felt like there was something more for me. For me, I felt like surviving was was more about maintenance versus I really wanted to thrive, which for me is means resiliency. And so I had a really difficult time with support groups. I felt like it was a bit on the negative side, and I've always been a person who's been extremely positive, but also aware of my, owning my emotions so that, giving myself permission to be sad and angry. But at the end of the day, I wanted this to be more of a transformative experience for me than a defining experience. So that's why I moved forward to create my own circle.
And
With, yeah.
we'll get to that in just a bit, Gillian. But I do want to go back to a part of this experience that, if it wasn't the toughest part, it would have been one of the toughest parts, and that was you're going through chemotherapy. How difficult was that?
Um, I when I was so I had to go through two phases of chemotherapy. One during my pregnancy, and then again after my son was born, about 3 weeks after. And I chose to really focus on my pregnancy almost as a distraction to keep me upbeat and not just crying in bed all day, just to focus on the life inside of me, because that is such a juxtaposition, right? You're trying to nurture this life inside of your body at the same time as killing cells, and so for me it was that I had to focus on that. And so I felt like that for me was a bit easier. I continued to work during that phase of my life as a marine biologist, and it gave me a distraction and something else to focus on. Once my baby arrived, is when it really got hard for me. I started the weekly chemo, which was hit me very, very hard. My body, um, I began, it was progressive, so it was, the effects were synergistic, and I was experiencing a lot of pain. And then, layered on top of that, I'm a new mother. So all of the exhaustion that comes along with, that phase, it was just everything was compounded. And, I really felt like it was a more difficult time for me then.
Was hair loss an issue?
Yeah, it was for me. And it was a bit of a wake up call. I was wondering if, like, do I really have this big of an ego? Um, but it was, and I think because when I lost my breasts, it was very personal. It was in the sense that not everyone could see that besides my husband, right? With the hair loss, it made me look sick, and then everybody knew. And I had all of my life, I always had a really long mane of hair. And it was almost like a protective cover. And so I felt very vulnerable and exposed during that phase. But in order, it was the only thing I could control, and that was to have a little group party with my friends and shave my hair off before it fell out. So I could control that, and that felt pretty good to me.
Well, speaking of the area that's under the hair, that's your brain. And I've heard from interview guests I've had who have undergone chemo, they talk about chemo brain. Did chemo brain ever assert itself with you?
Yes, indeed it did. And it was something that I spoke with my oncologist about regularly because I did go back to work and and my as a marine biologist, I would have to really apply myself from the head side of things. And memory loss, it was a bit of an odd experience for me because it was short-term memory loss. It wasn't the long-term memory loss. It would be something like, gosh, I forget your name, Bruce. Like it just would happen that way. And I'd be like, why am I not remembering this? And so when it really hit me, I was in Toulouse giving a talk in front of 300 people. And I I was talking away on the subject matter, and then I looked at the crowd and I just completely went blank on what I was talking about. And I was ashamed. I was embarrassed because that wasn't usual for me, and it was a lot to accept. I think I was pretty hard on myself. My boss was certainly very hard on me without understanding, no empathy whatsoever. Um, and it was at that time that I just realized that, maybe I need to step away a little bit and just focus on my health and not necessarily on my career.
Gillian, before we get to any other phase of your cancer journey, I think our viewers and listeners have heard you reference the birth of your son, but we haven't heard a lot about just how that went. And I think a lot of our viewers and listeners would like to know. So, how did that go?
It went really well. To be honest, it was well, I mean, it was painful as it always is for women, but it went really well, and it was a really beautiful experience. And I had a really wonderful supportive team. My OBGYN was just so great. She's for years, even through pre-cancer, when I was going through the issues with infertility, she was just so supportive. And then she started to work with my team at Hopkins just to make sure I had the best care possible. And I did, and I felt like, the moment I met my baby, I just was the greatest joy of my life.
To get back to your cancer journey, when did you sense that things were starting to improve? That maybe there was some metaphoric light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, um, so after my treatments and surgeries had ended, I really wanted to get back into feeling good about my life. I wanted to feel good about getting out of bed, like from not only like a physical perspective, but from a mental uh, health and wellness perspective. So I assembled a group of people around me who were experts in various areas of health and wellness to help me to just, get over some of the residual side effects of some of that chemo and the surgeries. My body just didn't feel right, and I really worked hard at it, and it felt very fulfilling. And I set my goal, and I was able to head to Tanzania with one of my very close friends and summit Mount Kilimanjaro. And that for me was a very cathartic experience because as you ascend, oxygen becomes an issue, and you don't talk very much, and you get into your own head. And I thought about a lot of things and how this journey really changed my perspective on life and what's important to me. And I knew that there was something more in my life for me ahead. So I just started to focus on that.
Give us an example of something that you learned or felt as a result of that enlightening time.
Um, I felt that, I wanted to be connected with more women in my community, young women. And I knew that, when I did become connected with women in my community, that I had something, to offer them in terms of my shared experience that maybe could help them.
Now, you have already left a few breadcrumbs in terms of the answer to this question, but I want you to fill in all other blanks. The I Rise Above Foundation. What inspired you to establish that?
Yeah. So when once you're finished with all of your treatments and surgeries and you're kind of sent away by your team of doctors to say, hey, I'll see you in 6 months. And I kind of felt like, whoa, what is that about? This is like, you're so used to being at the hospital every week and under like the survival mode of maintenance of just checking the boxes and doing everything that you need to do. Um, and so, as I had mentioned before, I assembled a group of people, wellness experts around me to help me feel better in all aspects of my life. And I had told my oncologist that I was going to go climb a mountain. And I think she laughed at me a little bit and said, "Okay, Gillian, I'll see you in 6 months." And so 6 months passed by, and I had worked really hard. One of the things that affected me a lot was that because of the types of drugs that I was on, I had instantly gained a lot of weight, and it was hard on my body. I felt a tremendous amount of joint pain and stiffness, and I just in general didn't feel good. I was a very athletic person prior to my diagnosis, doing triathlons and playing lots of sports and enjoying life in that way. So I showed up at I think it was my seventh month checkup because I was away. And I brought in my laptop and I showed her pictures of, what I had done and how good of a place I was in. And I think she saw there was a big transformation for me and asked me at that time if I'd be okay if she gave some young women in her clinic my contact information just to connect with, because those women were having a really difficult time with where they were at in their diagnosis. And of course, I said yes, absolutely. And I was connected with five women, all of whom asked me the question, how did you do that? I want to do that. Can you help me to do that? And it planted a seed in my mind about maybe there's something I can offer and help with that comes naturally for me. Because of all of these, if I felt all of these things and all of these other women are feeling these things, then we can't be the only ones. And so I went back to my job as a marine biologist, and I was a new mom, and I was also kind of burning the candle at both ends with this concept to start the I Rise Above Foundation. And then I had a recurrence, a metastatic recurrence, which for me just completely changed my life, transformed everything, and not in a bad way. I decided to leave my career, and I decided that this was my calling, that this is what I wanted to do. This is where I wanted to spend my time. And I felt like it would be very fulfilling to me.
Gillian, having an idea is one thing, putting it into action is another. What did you do to turn this great idea into reality?
Hmm. Well, in the beginning, I started with sort of a bit of a pilot in a wellness program with some people that had helped me originally get to a better place. And that was that we developed the iJourney program, which is a 6 month health and wellness program for young women after breast cancer. Some of our programs are for women during breast cancer, but this particular one was at the time it was sort of our flagship program. And the reason why it was for after breast cancer treatments and surgeries were over was because it involved international travel. It involved going away for a yoga wellness retreat, and in the beginning, and then at the end we would do an expedition somewhere. So, which would be like, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, or going summiting up to Everest Base Camp. And in the beginning, what we did was 2-week treks with in Patagonia in Chile and Argentina. So we really wanted women to be in a place where they felt healthy, or well enough to be able to go and do these things. And in the in between, our wellness experts would work with them in 2 or 3 areas that they really needed help with, so that they would be in a physical and mental state to be able to achieve those goals at the end of that program.
That's a lot of significant face-to-face interaction that you're having with a number of women on these trips in this internet division or internet driven time. Gillian, are there other things that I Rise Above can do for people around the country, around the world?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in, silver linings in things. I try to see the positive or opportunities. And with the pandemic, we had to stop offering in-person programming, obviously. And so, I wasn't sure, like many of us, what this pandemic really was gonna amount to. And so we just kind of sat back and watched and felt out, what was happening around the world in our country. And so after thinking about it for quite a while, we decided to develop a virtual online 12-week wellness program so that women could register, be part of it. We could offer programming and right from their computer screen at any time. And it was flexible for a lot of women. There's a lot of women in our program who are professionals, who are moms, and they just, it's always a bit of a challenge for them to be able to, just get to the gym for 6 a.m., for example, or just be, constrained by a particular schedule. So that has been such a success. It hasn't gone away. It keeps growing. Our membership keeps growing, and it's a really beautiful thing.
Our guest is Gillian Lichota of Washington, D.C. She's the founder of the I Rise Above Foundation. And before we go any farther, Gillian, for anybody who might want to check out your website, what's your web address?
Sure. It's one word, iriseabovefoundation.org.
Okay. And that I would guess would be kind of a one-stop shop for everything that you offer.
Yeah. So we offer more than just the programs themselves. We also we have a wellness collective webinar series. So on a monthly basis, we offer free webinars on topics that are germane to our community of young women. We also offer retreats and outdoor adventure trips with the opportunity to fundraise for their respective experience so that it's little to no cost to them at all.
Gillian, if you think back to day one for I Rise Above, when you had sort of this pilot program, and then you think about all the things you're doing now, face to face or via the internet, I'm guessing that there's probably a vision that you have for I Rise Above to do even more. And if so, what would that vision include?
Yes, I would. I would love to have to expand our 12-week virtual programming, to solicit more wellness experts to join us. So if there's anyone listening to this that wants to, please reach out. I would love to bring back the iJourney program as well. That was a real success for the women who were in that. And another thing that I really feel strongly about is that I would like to be able to develop a program for caregivers. I feel like caregivers are often the person left out of the overall equation. And there's so much that, I just think about my own caregiver, my husband, and, he needs his cup filled too, and needs to be able to connect with other caregivers in ways that really benefit them. So that's sort of something that, I'm seeing in the future that we can add on for sure.
Gillian, we're going to bring this to a conclusion. And whereas we always try to start from the same place, learning more about your life outside of cancer, we always like to end in the same way. And this should be right in your wheelhouse because this is the sort of thing that you do all the time. But if you were to encounter a woman who had just learned that she'd been diagnosed with breast cancer, isn't sure how to proceed, if there was a message for her, I'm sure that it would be a multifaceted message. But if there's one thing, one part of that message that would really stand out, an overarching part that you would want to get across to this woman, what would it be?
That's an excellent question. And I encounter it all the time, women reaching out. I think it's to be gentle on yourself, to give yourself permission to be to experience what you're experiencing, because the emotions of whatever you feel, they're temporary, and that to circle yourself with a group of people that really understand you. And so if there's anyone out there listening that is newly diagnosed and is a young woman, I encourage her to reach out to us. We have a wonderful support group, where we laugh and we cry, but we've become very good friends, and in an instant it can really make a difference when decisions need to be made and you need to bounce ideas off of friends, a tribe of women who really understand the kinds of needs and challenges before you.
And to help facilitate that reaching out, Gillian, one more time, your web address.
One word, IRiseAboveFoundation.org.
Excellent. Gillian, thanks so much for all you've shared in terms of your cancer journey and in terms of what I Rise Above seeks to do for others. It has done it, and there will be many more women who will be impacted in a positive way because of your foundation. Gillian, thanks so much for being with us on Cancer Interviews.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It's been a pleasure.
And that will wrap up this edition of Cancer Interviews. We want to remind you, as we've been hearing from Gillian, that if you're on a cancer journey, you are not alone. There are people out there like Gillian. There are foundations just like I Rise Above that are there to help you with your journey. So until next time, we'll see you on down the road.
Thanks for joining us today. For more information, please visit us online at cancerinterviews.com. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you back here again next time on the Cancer Interviews podcast.